The glass tower of Cole Enterprises rose over the Chicago skyline, its mirrored windows catching the thin winter sun. Inside, the lobby buzzed with muted purpose. Heels tapping, phones pressed to ears, the faint whir of the revolving doors as people slipped in and out, wrapped in their coats and deadlines. On the top floor, Ethan Cole sat behind a sleek black desk, already 3 hours into his Monday. Reports were spread before him in neat rows, a cooling espresso at his elbow. Numbers, margins, projections, the language he trusted. He adjusted his cufflink, glanced at the time, and prepared himself for another meeting. Predictability was his armor. There was comfort in order. But order rarely announced its leaving. At 9:14 a.m., his receptionist's hesitant voice broke through the intercom. "Mr. Cole, there's someone asking to see you. A child." He frowned. "A child?" "Yes, sir. She says she's here to work." Before he could respond, the door to the office opened slightly, and in the frame appeared the smallest figure ever to cross that threshold. A girl, 6 years old, maybe, stood with her chin barely above the desk's edge. She wore an oversized cleaning uniform, the fabric swallowing her thin frame, sleeves rolled but still dragging past her wrists. Her braid was crooked, strands slipping free, and on her feet were sneakers worn almost to threads. For a moment no one spoke. The city hummed faintly beyond the glass walls. Then the girl stepped closer, her shoes squeaking against the polished floor. Her eyes dark, steady, much too serious for her age, fixed on him. "My mom can't work today," she said softly, but with a weight that didn't tremble. "But I can help." The words hung in the air, fragile and enormous at once. Ethan Cole, who had stared down hostile investors and ruthless competitors without blinking, found himself mute. His pen slipped from his fingers, landing soundlessly on the stack of reports. He studied her, convinced there must be some mistake. A prank, perhaps, or a lost child who had wandered in. But the determination in her small face refused to be dismissed. The uniform was real. The way she clutched its hem was real. Somewhere deep inside, under years of steel and glass, something shifted. The silence stretched. Ethan leaned back slightly, searching for words, but the girl filled the space first. She stepped closer, standing as tall as her small frame allowed. "My name is Lily Turner," she announced, as if reading from some invisible script. "My mom works here. She cleans the floors. But today she's sick, and she said she can't lose this job. So I came." Her voice wavered on the last sentence, but her eyes didn't. Ethan blinked slowly, then leaned forward, elbows resting on the desk. "How old are you, Lily?" "6, she answered quickly. "But I can do things. I help Mom all the time. I know how to use the cart and the mop, and I can empty the bins. I promise I won't break anything." For a moment he simply stared at her, struck by the quiet precision of her words. It wasn't a child's play acting, it was a plea, a negotiation. "You came here alone?" he asked carefully. Lily nodded. Her braid slipped further down her shoulder as she straightened, determined not to look small. "I took the bus. I used my piggy bank money. It was enough for the ride." She paused, then added almost proudly, "I counted twice before I left." The image landed heavily in his mind. A little girl emptying her piggy bank, sorting coins with the focus of someone far older, then climbing onto a city bus alone. "And your mother knows you're here?" "She knows I was worried. She couldn't even get out of bed." Lily's lips trembled for the first time, but she pressed them tight. "She said the manager might fire her if she didn't show up. And then—" She stopped. Her small hands twisted in the fabric of the oversized uniform. "And then we wouldn't have a home." Her words struck sharper than any financial loss he'd ever measured. For Ethan, life had been built on expansion, on scaling, on turning risks into opportunities. But for this child, risk meant something rawer, smaller, and infinitely heavier. A roof, a bed, a meal. He rose from his chair without realizing it. "Lily," he said slowly, "you don't need to worry about your mom's job today. But she shook her head fiercely, as if the reassurance wasn't enough. I have to help. Please, I can start now. She tugged at the sleeve of the uniform, the fabric bunching around her wrist like armor. You don't have to pay me. Just don't take her job away. Ethan felt something constrict in his chest. Her determination was too large for her age, but it was held together by fear. A fear so familiar it echoed in the silence between her words. He walked around the desk and crouched slightly, lowering himself to her level. Up close, he noticed the scrape on her knee, the faint smudge of dirt on her cheek, the way her shoelaces had been tied with meticulous care but were fraying at the edges. Lily, he said gently, do you know what most 6-year-olds are doing on a Monday morning? She hesitated, wary of a trick. School. Exactly. They're in school. Not here in a skyscraper lobby, trying to save their mom's job. Her chin lifted stubbornly. But I'm not most kids. The words landed with a weight far beyond her years. Ethan stood slowly, running a hand over his jaw, uncertain what to do with the sudden ache pressing into his ribs. Around them, the city moved on, emails waited, boardrooms buzzed, markets shifted. But for once, he couldn't care less. He turned toward his assistant, who had been hovering anxiously by the door. Clear my schedule, he said quietly. The assistant blinked. Sir, you have. Everything can wait. Ethan cut in, his voice sharper than usual. All of it. Lily looked up at him, uncertain, as if trying to measure whether she'd caused trouble or fixed it. He softened his tone and crouched again, meeting her eyes. You don't have to clean anything today, but I'd like you to stay with me for a while. We'll call your mom together. Make sure she knows you're safe. For the first time since she'd entered, her composure cracked. A tear slipped down her cheek, surprising her more than anyone. She brushed it away quickly, embarrassed. Okay, she whispered. Ethan nodded. He guided her gently toward the leather chair near the window, where the city stretched out in steel and glass. She climbed up, legs swinging above the floor, dwarfed by the furniture. For a long moment, she just stared at the skyline as if it belonged to another world. And Ethan, standing a few steps away, realized it did. In his world, skyscrapers were built from capital and vision. In hers, survival rested on bus fare and borrowed uniforms. The contrast struck him like a fault line, and he knew, somehow, that nothing about this Monday would return to its tidy order again. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat in his office with Lily perched carefully in the oversized chair across from him, her small legs swinging above the polished floor. She had drawn quietly on a notepad he offered, her crayons scattered like fragile sparks of color against the glass and steel backdrop of Cole Tower. When she finally grew drowsy, he had one of his staff call her mother. The line rang several times before a frail voice answered. Hello. It was not the sharp, brisk tone of a professional. It was weak, breathless, threaded with apology. This is Ethan Cole, he began, his words measured. I believe your daughter is here with me at Cole Enterprises. She came because she was worried about your job. On the other end, silence stretched thin. Then came a muffled sound, part disbelief, part shame. Oh God, Lily, I told her to stay home. I told her. The woman coughed, the sound wet and harsh. I'm so sorry, Mr. Cole. She shouldn't have bothered you. Please don't let this cost me the position. I can work tonight. I'll manage somehow. Miss Turner. Ethan interrupted gently, the stern CO voice replaced by something quieter, more human. Your job isn't in danger, but your health clearly is. Where are you right now? Home, she whispered. In bed. I couldn't stand up this morning. But missing a shift means, he cut her off again, sharper this time. It means nothing compared to your daughter wandering alone through the city to save you. That's what it means. Her breathing stuttered, then steadied. She really came there herself? Ethan glanced at Lily, who was now asleep in the chair, head tilted, braids slipping loose. The crayon had fallen from her hand. He lowered his voice instinctively. She did. And she's extraordinary. But she shouldn't have had to. For a moment, Rachel Turner, her name finally offered, said nothing. Then, with quiet resignation, she began to explain. She told him about once being a nursing student, how she had studied through long nights, fueled by the dream of working in pediatric care. "I wanted to heal children," she said softly, almost to herself. "I wanted to give them the kind of comfort I never had." But her plans fractured when her fiancé left. She had been 3 months pregnant. "My parents, they didn't forgive me. They said I'd ruined everything. I left and never went back." Her voice cracked once, but she pressed on. "I worked where I could. Waitressing, laundromats. For a while, I slept with Lily on a friend's couch, then in a shelter when the friend moved away. I finally found this job here, cleaning floors at night. It's not much, but it's steady. I thought if I could just hold on long enough, Lily would never have to know what it felt like to be disposable." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. The word lodged in his chest like stone. Disposable. "She doesn't know," Rachel added quickly, as though rushing to defend her daughter from pity. "She just thinks I work hard. I tell her it's temporary, that I'm saving for nursing exams again. But between rent and food, I can barely keep us standing." Her cough returned then, deep and raw, cutting off the words. "Rachel," Ethan said quietly, his voice steady with decision, "you need a doctor." "No, I can't," she protested weakly. "Hospital bills." "Your daughter spent her last coins to get here today," Ethan interrupted. "She shouldn't be carrying that weight. Let me help." On the line, silence. Then a whisper, softer than the hum of the city through the glass. "Why would you?" Ethan looked again at Lily, sleeping soundly in a chair too big for her, in a world too big for both of them. "Because she reminded me what real strength looks like," he said simply. Rachel didn't answer, but in the silence, he thought he heard her cry quietly, muffled, ashamed, and yet, finally, not entirely alone. The next day, Ethan's phone rang while he was in the middle of a strategy call. He rarely took outside interruptions, but when the receptionist whispered the words "Rachel Turner, hospitalized," something in him snapped the thread of protocol. He left the conference room without explanation. The board could wait. The corridors of St. Mary's smelled faintly of antiseptic and old paint. Nurses moved quickly, their shoes squeaking across the linoleum. Ethan, out of place in his tailored suit, asked for Rachel at the front desk and was guided toward a small, curtained room in the corner of the ward. When he stepped inside, the sight hollowed him. Rachel lay propped against a thin pillow, her skin pale, lips cracked, hair damp with sweat. Tubes ran from her arm to an IV bag, and a monitor beeped softly at her side. She looked smaller than he remembered from her voice, fragile in the washed-out light of the hospital. Her eyes fluttered open, and when they met his, shame flooded her expression. She tried to sit up, wincing. "Mr. Cole, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for Lily to trouble you. She shouldn't have gone." "Rachel," he interrupted gently, taking a step closer. "Your daughter didn't cause trouble. She saved your job." She blinked at him, uncertain, as if waiting for the catch. "And she made me see something I'd forgotten," he continued. His voice was softer now, almost confessional. "What real strength looks like." For a long moment, she just stared at him, eyes bright with fever and disbelief. Then she looked away, pressing her lips together, as though holding back everything she wanted to say. He reached for the chair beside her bed and sat down. For a man used to negotiations worth millions, he found himself uncharacteristically nervous. "Your health comes first now. Nothing else matters." Rachel gave a bitter little laugh, then coughed into her sleeve. "Health matters less when bills pile higher than medicine bottles." Her honesty cut through him more than any polished presentation ever had. "I'll take care of it," he said quietly. Her head turned sharply, eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Why? You don't even know me." Ethan hesitated. He could have spoken of duty, of company loyalty, of philanthropy, but none of those words fit. Instead, he looked at her, really looked at her, the lines of exhaustion carved into her face, the quiet fire still burning behind her fatigue. Because your daughter came into my office yesterday wearing a uniform too big for her and told me she was ready to work, he said slowly. And I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, about what that means, about what you must carry, alone, every day. Rachel's gaze softened, the suspicion giving way to something more fragile, vulnerability. For the first time in years, she let someone sit with her silence. Ethan didn't move, didn't try to fill the quiet. He just stayed there, the steady hum of machines between them, until her breathing eased. And for Rachel Turner, who had built her life on endurance, that small act, someone simply staying, felt like the first mercy she had been given in a very long time. Rachel returned to work 3 weeks later, thinner but steadier. Pneumonia had nearly broken her, but bills waited, and she refused to lose her fragile hold on stability. She moved quietly through the midnight halls of Cole Tower, mop in hand, uniform freshly laundered though faded at the seams. To most, she was invisible, a shadow in the glass corridors. But not to Ethan. At first, he kept his distance. He told himself it was enough to ensure her schedule remained light, her insurance covered, her paycheck intact. Yet he found excuses to walk the stairwells late at night, where their paths might cross. He would nod politely, offering nothing more than a brief greeting. But even in those fleeting exchanges, something unspoken passed between them. A weight, a recognition. It began with small things. One evening, Rachel opened the supply closet to find a new pair of gloves folded neatly atop the shelves, softer and better fitted than the company-issued kind. A note lay beside them in careful handwriting. "Thought you could use these. E." She stared at it for a long time, then tucked it quietly into her pocket, as if afraid someone might see. Another night, she found her cart stocked with better supplies, stronger polish, clean rags, even a fresh thermos. No one mentioned them, but she knew. The gestures weren't grand, but they reached her in places untouched by charity. These were not gifts meant to display power. They were careful, almost shy, like someone leaving lanterns along a dark road. Their meetings grew longer. A stairwell door opening unexpectedly. An elevator ride at midnight. Rachel, with tired hair pulled into a knot, carrying her mop bucket. Ethan, jacket draped over one arm, briefcase in hand. "Late night again?" she asked once, her tone light but edged with exhaustion. "Seems to be a habit," he answered. Then, after a pause, "You, every night," she said, and smiled faintly. The kind of smile that carried both pride and resignation. It was in those moments, brief, unscripted, that Ethan began to notice things beyond numbers and reports. The way Rachel brushed stray strands of hair from her face with the back of her wrist. The way she paused to straighten picture frames in the lobby, as though even the smallest order mattered. The way she hummed under her breath, soft and unself-conscious, while scrubbing floors at 2 in the morning. And Lily, always Lily. The little girl sometimes waited at the edge of the lobby for her mother to finish, coloring on scraps of paper, humming to herself. One evening, Ethan paused on his way out and saw the drawing she had left on the receptionist's desk. 3 figures. A tall man in a suit, a woman in a uniform, and a little girl holding both their hands. Above them, in crooked letters, was scrawled, "My family." Ethan touched the paper gently, as though it might dissolve beneath his fingers. Later that week, he found Lily waiting again, her braid neater this time. She grinned at him without hesitation. "Mr. Ethan, look," she chirped, holding up another drawing. It was of the tower itself, only instead of windows, the glass walls were filled with hearts. Rachel flushed when she saw it. "Lily," but Ethan knelt slightly, eye level with the girl. "That's the best version of Cole Tower I've ever seen," he said. The child beamed, and Rachel's protest faded into a quiet laugh. In the weeks that followed, these fragments stitched themselves together. A hallway conversation, a note left under a supply cart, the quiet comfort of 2 people pausing in the middle of their different worlds, finding a rhythm that wasn't meant to exist, and yet somehow did. Neither spoke of it aloud. To name it might break it, But something had begun to grow between the silence and the stairwells, fragile as Lily's crayon lines, steady as the steps Rachel climbed night after night. And though neither dared say it, both felt it. A life carefully stitched back together, thread by quiet thread. It was late March when the rhythm shattered. Rachel had just finished scrubbing the marble floor in the executive lobby when she looked up and froze. A man leaned against the reception desk, his grin familiar in a way that made her stomach twist. "Rachel," he drawled, as though her name were still his to claim. "Mark Dawson." He hadn't changed much. Same slicked-back hair, same restless eyes, the faint scent of aftershave that once clung to her memories. He looked older, rougher around the edges, but the smirk was intact. The smirk that once convinced her she could build a life with him, before he vanished when she was 3 months pregnant. Her hands tightened on the mop handle. "What are you doing here?" "Relax," he said smoothly. "I came to see my daughter." The words struck like a slap. "You lost that right 6 years ago." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Funny thing, Rachel, rights don't just vanish. Courts love a biological father who suddenly wants to step up. Especially when the mother's been seen getting a little too close with her billionaire boss." Her throat tightened. "Don't." "Oh, I will," Mark whispered. "Unless, of course, you make it worth my while not to." He leaned in, his breath sour with arrogance. "A little money, Rachel. That's all. Keep me quiet, and we won't have to make this messy." Her chest burned with panic, but before she could reply, a voice cut through the hall. "Is there a problem here?" Ethan stood a few feet away, calm but sharp-eyed, his presence filling the space. Mark straightened quickly, flashing a false smile. "Mr. Cole," he said with mock politeness, "I was just catching up with Rachel. We go way back." Ethan's gaze flicked between them. "That much is clear. But this isn't the place." His tone left no room for argument. Mark smirked again, retreating a step but not in defeat. "Of course, I'll be seeing you both around." His eyes lingered on Rachel with a quiet threat before he walked away, his footsteps echoing too loudly against the marble. Rachel exhaled shakily, gripping the mop handle as though it were the only thing tethering her. Ethan stepped closer. "What does he want?" She shook her head quickly. "Nothing. It's fine." But Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Rachel." Her lips parted, but no words came. How could she explain years of abandonment, the fear of losing Lily, the sudden intrusion of a man who had once promised everything and delivered only absence? "I'll handle it," she whispered finally, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. But she couldn't. Not alone. The fallout came quickly. Mark tried his threats, cornering Rachel outside her apartment building with promises that turned to growls. But this time she wasn't alone. A quiet team of lawyers, sent by Ethan, filed papers before Mark could even act. Custody petitions, background checks, records of abandonment. When he realized he had no ground to stand on, his bravado cracked. By the time the court date arrived, Mark Dawson barely looked at Rachel, his words reduced to mumbles. The judge dismissed his claims, and in that silent victory, Rachel finally breathed free. But freedom alone didn't mend the weight of years. It was Ethan who saw it, how Rachel still carried herself carefully, as though waiting for the next collapse. So he gave her something more than safety. He offered her a role she had once dreamed of, though in another form, community outreach director at Cole Enterprises. At first she resisted. "I don't belong in an office. I clean them." "You belong wherever your compassion takes you," Ethan said. "And you know what this company forgets too often? That behind every statistic are people who just need someone to see them. You already do that, Rachel. Better than anyone here." And slowly she began. Her new office was small, tucked on a quieter floor, but Rachel filled it with plants Lily picked out, drawings taped to the walls, and a second-hand lamp that glowed warmly in the evenings. She organized food drives, coordinated job training workshops, and built programs for employees struggling with childcare. She didn't speak like an executive. She spoke like someone who had been there, and people listened. Ethan found himself watching more often than he admitted. watching her navigate a room with quiet steadiness, watching her shoulders ease as she realized she belonged, watching Lily race down the hall after school, waving another drawing for Mr. Ethan. It was Lily, in the end, who stitched them fully together. One afternoon she appeared in Ethan's office with a sheet of paper covered in bright marker strokes. "It's us," she explained proudly. 3 figures again, this time under a tree with a picnic blanket, and in shaky block letters above them, "My family." Rachel flushed, trying to take the paper back, but Ethan only smiled and pinned it on his wall. A year later, spring returned to Chicago. The air was soft with the smell of damp earth and new blossoms. In Lincoln Park, beneath the wide branches of an oak tree, a picnic blanket was spread. Sandwiches wrapped in foil, juice boxes, and Lily's crayons scattered like confetti. Rachel sat with her shoes off, the grass cool beneath her feet. Her hair was loose for once, the wind tugging gently at it. She laughed at something Lily said, the sound lighter than it had been in years. Ethan watched them both, his chest tightening with something he hadn't felt in decades, home. When Rachel turned to him, cheeks flushed from the sun, he reached into his jacket pocket. Not for papers, not for contracts, but for a small velvet box that had weighed on him for weeks. "Rachel," he began, his voice lower than usual. The park quieted around them, though perhaps that was only in his chest. Her eyes widened as he opened the box, the ring catching the sunlight in a way that made it seem almost shy. Before Rachel could speak, Lily gasped and clapped her hands. "Say yes, Mom!" she cried, bouncing on her knees. Rachel laughed through sudden tears, her hand covering her mouth. "Lily!" But Ethan was already smiling, eyes locked on hers. "She's faster than I am," he murmured. Rachel looked at him, at the man who had once been a distant figure in a tower of glass and steel, now kneeling in the grass beside her. The man who had seen her at her weakest and hadn't looked away. The man who had let kindness, not power, shape what came next. And though she didn't speak right away, though her tears blurred the oak leaves above, her hand reached for his. Fingers curled, steady and sure. Lily squealed, falling into their arms, wrapping them all together in a tangle of laughter and sunlight. The city stretched beyond the park, busy and unyielding. But under that oak tree for a moment time slowed, and in that stillness, 3 lives, once scattered, once fragile, wove themselves into something whole. Family.